Hey, Bill, the other day we broke down one of the articles you wrote on Sporting News talking about college football coaches facing the hottest hot seats and most pressure in 2020. I wanted to have you on to talk about, obviously, that and more. The hot seat this year intrigues me because of the current times that we're in, right? So much uncertainty with this college football season. A lot of schools really going to struggle with some of these buyouts if these coaches don't meet their expectations. And so I wanted to have you on to talk about a couple of these guys. And I want to start off with Will Muschamp at South Carolina because Will, the last 2 years, they've had a brutal schedule. Not only does the schedule kind of hurt them, they've had some injuries, and Will's got a $13 million buyout. And I do find it kind of funny that Texas A&M has gotten a pass over the last couple of years because of their schedule, when South Carolina's has actually been a little bit more difficult. Do you think that the leadership at South Carolina, because of all those reasons, will give Will Muschamp, regardless of what happens this year, another year?
We'll see. I mean, I think you mentioned the buyouts. I think that's key with a lot of programs right now, and then with the uncertainty of the season and what to do with the athletic budgets if we don't have football. So, I mean, obviously Will Muschamp's one of those guys that's kind of on the hot seat from that standpoint. I would say Chip Kelly, Todd Helton also. But, to me, as that article pointed out, there's a difference between being on the hot seat and the difference between mounting pressure. And I think that depends on the program you're coaching.
Now, Clay Helton at USC, being 13-12 in the last two seasons at USC, we know that's not going to get it done. And that affected their recruiting last year when all the rumors started to come out. They had just a bad class because a lot of players thought that Clay Helton would not be there. This year, they actually have a top 5 recruiting class. And I think USC learned last year, hey, you can't put all that news out there because you will not benefit if your coach is, publicly on the hot seat. But we're not foolish, Bill. We all know that Clay Helton has to win this year.
Oh, for sure. I think obviously with this program that had that lack of success in the Pac-12, and they have talent. They have some talent coming back this year in Slavis at quarterback, Monroe St. Brown. That's an All-American caliber receiver. Strong recruiting on both sides that they've studied a little bit. I mean, there's no excuse for them not to contend for a Pac-12 South championship. I always do this question, and I can't really give you a win total, but I would say if they're not in that 9-10 win range and competing for a Pac-12 conference title, then he'd probably be in a little bit of trouble.
You mentioned Chip Kelly there at the beginning of this interview, Bill, and that's an intriguing one to me. 7-17 with UCLA. And Chip Kelly, when he was on the scene at Oregon, was the hottest name in college football. And I'm in the minority here, but I've argued, I think that college football caught up with what Chip Kelly was doing. We've seen it so many times. When you're the new dog, right? When you've got some new tricks and nobody else exactly knows how to defend those tricks, a lot of times you can win football games. I always tell a story of my high school. My high school was the first team in the country really to go 5 wide. So we threw the ball all over the place in the early mid-90s when nobody else was doing it. We had a lot of success. Do you think Chip Kelly can bounce back and ever get back to the point he was at Oregon, or has he been kind of figured out a little bit?
How'd you play running back if you guys went 5 wide?
We had literally 4 receivers against Longview, Texas, because it was hotter than hot in East Texas, cramp up, and it was like, okay, we can't throw the ball anymore. And so, Bill, the play was direct snap to the running back. We didn't even hand it off. The center just direct snapped it.
Fair enough. But, I mean, I'm with you, though, Jacob. I know they're not – Chip Kelly's offense isn't cutting edge anymore is the point. There's so many teams that run those principles and that have that rushing attack. And, obviously with him, he needs that dynamic quarterback. Dorian Thompson-Robinson can be that in flashes, but you also got to play on the other side of the ball too. And I don't think they've had the necessary recruiting resources at UCLA are always touchy with that program. And I don't know if it fits. And to me, sometimes college football is about fit. And so far it hasn't fit quite like we thought it would. I mean, I was on record when he was hired, thought it was a home run hire for UCLA, and it just hasn't turned out that way.
He almost got the Florida job. I mean, he was right there at the end when Dan Mullen got the Florida job. Chip Kelly's name was attached to that as much as anyone. And now, being 7-17 at UCLA, this feels like this could be his last real big opportunity at a Power 5 school.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to have to win this year. And they're another program. That's what makes the Pac-12 South so interesting. They're in that boat. Kevin Sumlin in Arizona is in that boat. We talked about Helton, and that's about half your division almost. And you're dealing with steady competition from Kyle Whittingham at Utah. And I think one of the better coaching jobs of the last 2 years. If Kelly's been kind of a disaster, Herm Edwards has been a home run at Arizona State. I mean, he's got his quarterback, he's got his offensive line, he's got some talent on the defensive side. I think the Sun Devils might be one of those sleeper teams we all look at this year that could be very interesting.
I think it's very important in our business, Bill, to admit when you're wrong. I was wrong about Herm Edwards in Arizona State. There is no question. I love Herm Edwards. I thought he was an NFL coach. I did not think it would translate to the college football game. He had not been there. College football has so many moving parts. I'll raise my hand and say I was absolutely wrong about Herm Edwards. He's done a hell of a job at Arizona State.
It speaks to character sometimes. I mean, when you got these older coaches in there, Mack Brown is another one that's just dominant, been awesome in his second stint at North Carolina. I think Les is still improving Kansas. I mean, these are high-character coaches that know they might be a little bit older, but again, when they're recruiting, they can go get it because the parents know that these guys can be successful. And obviously you played for Les, and I've dealt with Mack and Herm a little bit, where these are high-quality coaches that are going to give your kids a real chance to succeed both on and off the field, and it's a pretty easy sales pitch.
Catching up with Bill Bender of the Sporting News here on Hangin with Hester. Bill, before we get to a trio of coaches that I kind of want to lump together, Scott Frost, Nebraska, is very intriguing to me. He's 9-15 in 2 seasons. I don't really know what that job is anymore, and I think a lot of Nebraska fans thought they could do better, right? When Bo Pelini was there, winning 9 and 10 games, they thought they could get to another level. They would pay a lot of money to get to 9 and 10 games with Bo Pelini again, but it felt like Scott Frost was almost like the only guy that could do it over the last couple of years, and they go get him from UCF. It has not happened yet. They've had some close games. They haven't been able to pull those games out. Do you think this is the year you'll start to see the transition and Scott Frost will finally have that winning season at Nebraska?
We'll see. I mean, I think he's obviously taken a brick-by-brick approach. I think he knew how much work he had to do, even if the rest of us didn't. And Nebraska's been a process. I think, for them, the goal this year has to be to try to compete with the Iowas and Wisconsins in that division, and they might not have the lines to do that yet. And Scott Frost is going to be given a leash because he was the savior and Messiah-type figure. But they've still got a long way to go. It's a little bit like Jim Harbaugh in Michigan. They're going to expect you to win huge. And even if you don't do it 4 or 5 years in, he's still the right guy for the job. I mean, is there anybody better for the Nebraska job than Scott Frost? I don't think there is. And I still feel that way about Jim at Michigan, even though he can't beat Ohio State.
Jim was one of the guys I wanted to kind of throw in a trio of guys. Jim Harbaugh, Jimbo Fisher, Tom Herman. So many expectations when they were hired. And, of course, LSU fans know Tom Herman, Jimbo Fisher, those names were tied to before Coach O got the full-time job. They have not performed where they've been at. Now, Michigan is 47-18, but they have not gotten the big wins. They have not yet gotten to that Big Ten championship game. They have not beaten Ohio State. Jimbo Fisher, we know the schedule, but they have been underwhelming. Tom Herman, right now, they just seem like they've got trouble in Austin. It felt like this was going to be the year, and then during this offseason, everything's going on in the world. They have had some major hits to their football program. 8-5 a year ago. If I told you, hey, you get to pick from these 3 that can get out of this rut, can move forward and be a championship caliber coach with the current team that they're with, who would you pick out of that group, Bill?
I mean, I'd still pick Harbaugh because all they have to do is beat the Buckeyes.
Yeah.
And that's it. I mean, they've done everything else. I think obviously Herman and Fisher have the recruiting going on in Texas, and they've done better there. But I mean, you said it about Fisher. They're 1-7 against top 10 teams. That's Harbaugh's problem too, really. I mean, all 3 of those programs share something in common, that they're trying to bust into that elite gated community of Oklahoma, Georgia, LSU, Alabama, Ohio State, and Clemson. And LSU just kind of pushed their way in last year with that national championship run. So until you win in those games, you can't get to the next level. And that's really kind of like I'm glad you picked all those 3 out, Jacob, because that's kind of like playoff purgatory with those 3.
You got a lot of pressure on those 3 coaches, but some of their contract and other things, they're still tied to those programs. It is very intriguing to me to see which one of those can try to get out of that rut, like we mentioned, because you have got so many expectations and they have not yet performed. A&M right now in the West isn't getting any weaker in the SEC. Texas can't get over Oklahoma. Oklahoma State's going to be really good as well. And you mentioned it, Ohio State just right there in front of Michigan. And, Bill, as you know, being in the state of Ohio, Ohio State's not going anywhere. They might be just as good or better than they were a year ago where they were in the college football playoff.
Yep, I mean they really are. I mean, when you pick the playoff picture, it is the usual suspects like Ohio State, Clemson, Oklahoma, Alabama. I mean, that's what we picked at Sporting News, unfortunately, and that's where the sport is a little bit. I mean, LSU's lost a lot, but they've got a team that's going to still be pretty talented when you have Jamar Chase and Derek Stingley, and then Georgia, of course. Georgia's that one, Jacob, that I just think every year there's going to be a little bit more pressure on Kirby if they don't win at all. Because it's the same thing that happened with Mark Richt. He had teams capable of winning it that didn't, and Kirby's still early and still has done. I mean, they've recruited at Alabama's level. So I just think every year that they don't get it done, he'll be the one that faces the most pressure.
Bill, I'm glad you brought up Kirby Smart, and I respect the hell out of Kirby Smart. He was one of the DB coaches when I first got to LSU and helped me out a ton. So I'm not sitting here talking bad about Kirby Smart and the job that he's done, but we do know those expectations they have at Georgia, and it does seem like they have gotten so close, and their window was open. It was wide open, and I'm not saying it's shut, but you only have so many opportunities to win that championship, and you can feel the pressure when they make as many changes as they did on their staff. When they go get a Jamie Newman from Wake Forest, it does feel like they know, okay, we've got to go out there and we've got to not only win, because we've been to Atlanta, we got to start winning championships. So we have got to bring a national championship to this program that hasn't done so since the 80s. And so just by their moves alone, changing coordinators, losing Sam Pittman to Arkansas, bringing in Matt Luke, it does feel like they know that they're in that window to win a national championship now, and they've got to get it done.
That's it. I mean, everything you said, I think LSU kind of opened their eyes to the style of football that's going to win national championships. You got to be able to put 40 to 45 on it. Georgia's way, there's nothing wrong with that, being able to run through opponents like they have. It's very reminiscent of the early Saban dynasty, but I think that's where it comes in when you go get Newman and a new offensive coordinator. I think they're going to change the way they do things a little bit philosophically with those receivers they have, because, again, when you lose to LSU, when you lose the way they've lost to Alabama, I do think there's a psychological element at work. And, again, of all the programs that claim to have blue blood or that kind of stuff, they're the one that definitely, to me, is on the clock because it's 1980. And when it's been, we're 40 years now.
Yeah.
That's a long time for a program like that to go without one.
You're exactly right. When you put that number out there and you say 40 years, and when you've got Alabama winning national championships like they have, right? You've got Auburn winning a national championship, playing for another one. We all know Auburn and Georgia go way back. When you have LSU winning 3 since 2003, you can understand some of that pressure is going to continue to mount on them. Florida's won a couple, right, since then as well. And so all these schools within your conference that recruit on the same level that you do, and we use all these resources just like these other schools do, I can understand why the fan base is like, we want to win national championships. That has to be our goal. Yeah,
I mean, they're held to that standard. And I do believe Georgia's, I do say this all the time, they're one of the 5 that's capable of winning it all. And I don't know that Oklahoma is. I think Oklahoma's a playoff team, but until I see them beat an SEC team on the big stage, and they had their chance against Georgia a few years ago with Baker. But to me, it's Georgia, LSU, Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State. And until proven otherwise, those are the 5 teams that I believe are capable of winning it. And that's why it has to sting even more for Georgia, because those other 4 schools have done that.
Bill, before we let you go, and I appreciate your time, I know we've gone long today, and we appreciate you hopping on with us a little bit longer than normal. I want to ask you about LSU. I know you just came out with your preseason All-Americans over at Sporting News. 2 LSU players on that list, Jamar Chase, Derek Stingley Jr., who could possibly be the best player on offense coming back and the best player on defense coming back in the country. I know LSU lost a lot, not only coaches, but players, everything above, right? But with that kind of talent coming back, is this a team you can still see making a run and getting to the college football playoff?
It puts a lot of pressure on Miles Brennan, obviously, with a tough act to follow. But again, you said it, Jamar Chase, best receiver in the game. Derek Stingley, he's getting comparisons to Charles Woodson, who, in my estimation, might be one of the top 5 football players ever, both levels. And, I think when you have that kind of talent, you can build around it. So, obviously losing Brady, too. I mean, they're going to have to do all the things you do. But this is where we're going to find out if they truly are on the level of Bama, Clemson, and Ohio State. And those are the 3 programs, to me, that have been able to absorb the heavy losses and go back and do it again. And that'll be Ed Orgeron's challenge this season.
Bill Bender, you're the man. You can catch Bill's work over at the Sporting News. Does a fantastic job there. Was our go-to Joe Burrow correspondent all of last football season, being there in the Athens area. Bill, we appreciate it. You can follow Bill on Twitter at BillBender92.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. Thanks, Jacob.